We would like to thank the guild Set Sail for Fail for use of their videos within our guides. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Warlords of Draenor raiding guide. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the mythic version of Brackenspore in the Highmaul raid. Now, in order to complete this fight, you're going to want to bring 2 tanks, 4 to 5 healers depending on how strong your healers actually are, and then the remaining a balanced mixture of ranged and melee DPS. Now, in this guide we are only going to be focusing on what has changed in the mythic version of the encounter, so please do click on our channel below in order to go and view our heroic mode guide if you've not yet seen that. Now, first of all, when you get to this boss, the very first thing you're going to notice is that there are 3 flamethrowers on the floor and not 2 like in the heroic mode version of this fight, which means you're going to have to nominate 3 people in order to deal with the creeping moss during this encounter. Now, what you will also find is that during the encounter, there will be higher amounts of the creeping moss, and it will also spread a lot quicker than it did in the heroic mode version, which is why you've got 3 flamethrowers to actually deal with it. What you want to do is you want to separate the 3 flamethrowers into kind of different sides of the room. So what you could do is have one near the entrance, have one on the opposite side, and then have one that will deal with the moss that's kind of near the water or shoreline if you want it to be. And you can also place world markers on the ground in order for your flamethrower guys, the nominated ones so to speak, to communicate with each other and let each other know where they're going to go and clear up moss next. It's vital that you deal with the moss in a swift and quick manner, because it will get out of control very fast if it's not dealt with correctly. Something else worth noting on the mythic version of this encounter is that yes, your entire raid will be taking more overall damage, but you'll probably notice that the tanks are taking a stupid amount of damage compared to what they did on the heroic mode. So because of this, where possible, you want to try and bring your strong tank healers such as your Disc Priests and your Holy Paladins. And I believe with Disc Priests, the 99% reduced healing debuff that tanks actually get is completely ignored by any absorbed shields, so you can kind of cheese that ability to a certain extent while also not exploiting it at the same time. While we're sticking on the theme of healing, you'll also notice that the Infesting Spores ability that was on the heroic mode version of this encounter is also going to deal a hell of a lot more damage on mythic difficulty. Now, because the rate at which the mushrooms also decay is also increased, you want to make sure that you're getting these mushrooms topped off just at the point where you definitely need them. So, for example, the living mushrooms, you want to top them off literally just as Infesting Spores is about to start, so that you can get the full use of it and not have to struggle to keep the mushroom alive. When you're then stacking up in the mushroom in order to get its healing benefits, you'll also find that it's probably easier to use healer cooldowns as well in order to make sure that people aren't dropping too low. Because you will find that yes, the living mushroom will heal you, but in turn the Infesting Spores will also deal a lot of damage, so it can be a bit sketchy, especially if abilities are going off just before the Infesting Spores and just after the Infesting Spores, which they will be. And finally, on the healing front in this fight, as well as also the DPS front, you'll notice that instead of there being 2 of the spore shooters spawning, there are going to be 4 of them spawning. Now, because of this, you need to help your healers out here DPS by getting these killed off as soon as they spawn. Once they come up, they should be your highest priority to kill them, so that you can then safely stack up for the Infesting Spores abilities, or move around the room in order to avoid some of the mythic mechanics, without having to then worry about getting blown up by the abilities the spore shooters are throwing at you. Simply kill these off as soon as possible, and you'll also find that if, say, a Boomkin is using the flamethrower and they get the increased damage buff, and then they use their AoE as its Starfall ability, it will deal a lot of damage to the spore shooters, so that is something to keep in mind in your raid composition. And when it comes to DPSing the fight, you're also going to want to make sure you've got an interrupt rotation for the big ad that's going to spawn, which is the Fungal Flesh Eater, because the decay ability he casts will completely annihilate your raid if it does go through. You need to make sure you've got at least 3 players in rotation for interrupting this ability, and you'll also want to maybe have a couple of ranged as backups, so that when you are moving to avoid the mythic mechanics, which we're going to focus on in a minute, you still have the reliable interrupt and don't have to rely on, say, a melee player who could be running away from a tsunami coming towards them in order to interrupt it. So on the Mythic version of this fight, you've got two new abilities that you're going to have to deal with, and the first one goes by the name of Call of the Tides. And what this will do is it will cause Brackenspore to mightily stomp, calling forth the sea. He's kind of releasing the Kraken, but not really. And what it will do is it will cause tidal waves to come crashing towards the raid, and if anyone is to get hit by these tidal waves, they're going to instantly die, as it will deal over 350,000 frost damage to them. Now, this ability is simple and also difficult to deal with. It's simple because there are gaps in the tidal wave for you to move to in order to avoid it hitting you, but it's also difficult because you could be at one end of the room and the gap could be at the exact opposite end of the room, so you're going to need to make sure you've got abilities such as your stampeding roars in order to give you the speed increase to make it to the gap and not get one-shot by the tidal wave. You'll also find that you may have times where the tidal wave is also lining up with other abilities such as the infesting spores. So you could get the tidal waves coming just before an infesting spores, meaning you've got to move away from the living mushroom and then move back to it while also healing through infesting spores. Or it could come straight after, so you could be low on health after the infesting spores, a tidal wave comes, and then you've got to move out and your healers have to singularly heal people up instead of using the healing abilities from the living mushroom. And the next new ability you're going to have to deal with on the Mythic version of this encounter goes by the name of Exploding Fungus. And what this will do is it will cause Brackenspore to sprout exploding mushrooms that are going to inflict over 350,000 fire damage to anyone within 3 yards of them when they blow up. So what these mushrooms will do is they'll spawn, you'll see them popping out of the ground, and then a few seconds later they're just going to simply blow up and kill anyone that's near them. They're nice like that. So what you need to make sure you're doing is moving away from the mushrooms once they have spawned, but also be aware of new ones spawning underneath you once you have moved, as they can do that from time to time. Again, the exploding mushrooms can also line up with the infesting spores ability, so you may get it just before, meaning you've got to spread out to avoid the explosions and then stack up again, or you could get it just after, meaning you're stacked up for the healing, and then you've got to spread out as fast as possible in order to not get blown up by a mushroom. And the very last final thing that I'd like to mention about this encounter is the rejuvenating mushrooms that do spawn, and these are the blue ones. And in order to conserve your mana, it's probably best if your healers do not focus on these when they are alive, unless you have abilities such as Lay on Hands in order to instantly heal them up, or say a Restoration Druid's Nature's Swiftness and then a Healing Touch in order to heal it up to full in an instant. You should only really focus on these if your healers are struggling with mana, but throughout the entire encounter you're probably only going to bring them up once or twice in order to get the haste and the mana regeneration buff from it. So that's going to do it for this Warlords of Draenor Mythic raiding guide. If you'd like to view a written version of this guide, then please do head on over to flaskup.com or click on that link that's in the video description below. Alternatively, if you'd like to view our other Mythic raiding guides, then please do head on over to our channel. As always, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in future Mythic raiding guides or heroic/flexible raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.